That smooth jazz will never get old to me. Every single time I forget about it and I hear it, I love it.
That's so funny. I need to figure out how to put an intro video because I didn't know that that's something you could do.
Oh, we got it dialed in here at Coalesce.
You do.
Absolutely dialed in. Yeah, you definitely should incorporate some smooth jazz into your intros. Usually it takes a bit of a second for everybody to kind of trickle in. There's always a little bit of a lag. So we'll let that kind of start. You know, I think it's always great to see who is dialed in or logged in right now. So if you want to just hit us up in the comment section, let us know where you're coming in from, where you're at physically right now in the world. It's always nice to see some global presence as we do these coffee with coalesces. But let's get started. I'm pumped. I'm super excited to have Ben Rogojan, also known as the Seattle data guy, but really is in Denver, Colorado. So it's a little bit misleading at this point. But we've done so many events with you, Ben. It's always a blast. I feel like you got a great perspective and you got a great community of people that, you write blog posts about. You've been one of the first people, in my opinion, that has kind of become a data influencer.
Oh, no.
You're okay with that term?
It's one of those things that I've done it by like byproduct, right? Like where it's like, look, I do consulting, and like in order to get clients, like I want to share content. I want to like make sure I share value. So
look,
the influencer part comes on accident.
You're not an Instagram model, but you're just as good when it comes to the data world.
Wow, I don't know how I should take that. Look, you're not as
No, I was actually super pumped that I tuned into some of your content in the earlier days and felt like the data world, the data community really needed somebody to push it forward and produce content that, like you said, just helps increase awareness and knowledge around what goes on and how to improve and accelerate your career. So I've always been a really big fan. I think you and I caught up when we came out of Stealth about a year ago. It's been awesome getting to know you. So I'll let you do an intro. Then we've also got Stewart, who is our newest Snowflake data superhero, also just an amazing human being altogether at Coalesce.
In case the data superhero team is watching,
shout out. So yeah, Ben, why don't you start us off? Just give us a quick intro if you don't mind. And same with you, Stewart, and then we can kick this thing off.
Yep. Hey, and for people who don't know me, I'm Ben, again, a.k.a. Seattle data guy, but now in Denver. Basically, been kind of in the data engineering space, data infrastructure space for the last near decade now. Started off in like healthcare, honestly, working at hospitals, kind of doing the same thing, BI, intelligence. Went to healthcare startup where we kind of just focused on creating, like, honestly, we just like aggregated data, created dashboards off it, and resold it back to other companies. So that was our focus. It was, I say startup, but it was really a successful small company, right? Like it was profitable, and just probably was never going to grow much more. Then after that, was at Facebook for a few years doing data engineering. And all throughout that, I've been consulting. Just in 2021, it finally got to the point where, doing consulting was most of what I was doing anyway. So I was like, I better quit Facebook before they're like, oh, do you work here anymore? I just got busy, and I was like, all right, I'm going to try doing this. So now I help companies kind of set up their data stacks or figure out if they need to replace things, figure out if they can simplify things. Sometimes I do, honestly, even sometimes product analysis on all of the different solutions. So, consult all over in the data space.
Awesome. Love it. Excited to have you on board.
Yeah.
And how about you, Stewart?
Yeah. So I'm the more seasoned one in the room. So I went through the on-prem data warehouse explosion, mostly around Oracle tools. Then, the big data revolution, and now the cloud evolution, I guess. And so spent a lot of time taking customers off-prem, I guess you'd say, with my company Red Pill Analytics, which I sold in 2019. Moved around the space a little bit until joining Coalesce, and I'm now the head of customer experience. So a lot of my experience consulting with big enterprises, I take a customer first approach and lead Coalesce around support, customer success, and our DevRel, relationship with developers and how to make them more successful and what they want to see in the product. And really excited to be here with Ben. I guess he's an influencer now by some of that's going to rub off on me, right? So I'm going to get more likes.
It's funny.
Ben, I don't know, Ben, you don't like being called a data influencer. We'll just call you data impact.
It's kind of one of those things, like maybe I just have to learn to accept it. I think it's because I want people to think of me as like someone that's like more of a consultant first and not
Sure.
not as an influencer first. But I get that that's like also part of the thing. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main thing it's always focused on is, and all your content's focused on is putting a magnifying lens on things that are going on in the industry, how people can accelerate their careers, how they can just advance in general, have a more modern perspective when it comes to analytics. So, one of the things I always love hearing about, since you're talking to all types of different companies, you're working with so many different organizations, is some of your expectations for 2023. That goes to both of you gentlemen, but Ben first, like what expectations do you have in this year, and what trends are you seeing that you're excited about or not so excited about, just things that are happening?
Yeah, I think that, like, at least even with a lot of clients I'm talking with or possible prospects, there's definitely plenty of discussions more in terms of like doing more with less, so to speak. Obviously, there's a lot of that focus where it's like, all right, we are coming out of this like weird world where it's like, I said, I've been doing this for about a decade. Well, for over a decade now, we've had whatever cheap money, and so now we're going to this world where that's not the thing. So yeah, it is an interesting paradigm shift where kind of that cheap money and like data driven at any cost kind of like just tied together perfectly, right? So teams were blowing up, everything was exploding. Like, even looking back when I worked at Facebook, like thinking about how big the team was that it was and what we focused on, I was like, wow, that really was a big team for what we were doing. Like,
Yeah,
it's nice to think that it could be that big, but yeah, it's like when you really think about it, it doesn't necessarily make sense. So I think there's a lot of that discussion. I think some people are swinging a little too hard. Obviously, like some people are like, we got to just do everything like as cheap as possible. Which is not obviously either the right way, but I do see that people are trying to figure out like what is a rational amount of money to actually put into your data team. So I think there's just some more thought being put there, which is good, right? Like I think that's good. I think that's something that should have probably always been there. Again, when you're in it when you get out of college, your only focus is get a job. So when you're in it for so long, you're just like, oh, this is normal. But like, having this breather, I think has been good for the industry to some degree, because we can kind of refocus, rethink about things. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels healthy, right? It's like, to a degree, if you're on the inside of a company like at a Facebook and you're looking at the problems they're trying to solve, and you're like, we probably have way too many people focused on this. Like, we could accomplish just as much. If you're consciously thinking that, that's probably true. And I think that for the past couple of years prior to tech stocks getting hammered, it was just this kind of like growth mindset of just go. Don't think about the costs associated with things. Just like try to get the problem solved. And now people are businesses are under a bit more pressure to actually be more careful, be more cautious, be more thoughtful about how they spend money, especially when it comes to human resources, which has been interesting for us as well. I don't know, Stewart, is there anything that you've been noticing personally that's been going on? I'm sure you've seen similar things to what Ben's describing, but.
Absolutely. So efficiency, definitely agree with Ben on that. Not just how much are we spending or what's a reasonable amount to spend, but are we getting efficient results? Are we doing more with less is what a lot of people like to say, but it's not so much that as are we making things easier? Are we investing in products or solutions that help us become more efficient in this? But also, I think what I'm seeing with a lot of customers is maybe for the first time they're having to, sing for their supper or prove that data is valuable and that specifically their implementation. And it's really tough to do that, to measure outcomes, right? we all know what the outcomes are. Better decisions at the end of the day is the thing we're all hoping for. But how do you measure the decision that wasn't taken? How do you measure the decision that was taken that's a little bit smarter or better than the next best decision? I think figuring that out in this time will be very valuable. And it's not necessarily that it's some big mystery that has to be unlocked. I think we just have to be mindful that we're, as a data team, we are reporting back to the business or the organization and saying, this is what we saved you. This is the risk we avoided in the best way we can. And I think that will help continue to get the budgets, even if they are smaller, at least not have them become any smaller than they are.
Did either of you feel like you noticed a switch in the way that businesses and data teams have been thinking, in the sense that I feel like historically, or at least up until recently, there's been this huge focus on, things like optimizing your database or like trying to be able to optimize compute. Whereas now it's more around, how do we optimize the actual team and the amount of people focused on projects? Like I always felt up until recently, people didn't necessarily look at the total cost of ownership. They weren't looking at TCO. They were just looking at the cost of the technologies. Yes. And then now recently it's like, oh, back to Ben's statement around like being at Facebook and feel like there's a lot of people focused on something. Now it's like becoming more around how many people are actually in the team. Like we're not going to hire any more people. Like that budget's cut. Like those types of things are starting to be impacted, which I think historically wasn't the case up until recent. Is that what you've noticed? Both of you have noticed as well?
Why don't you go first, Ben?
Okay, sure. I was gonna try that. I think it's interesting. There's definitely a lot of, again, contractions in team size. So yeah, I think there's some reduction in like how can we again do more with less. But yeah. I think what's interesting there is there's still just like a tendency, especially as like engineers, like to want to do things our own way. I think. To want to build things, to want to like, it's like, hey, this is why you hired me. Like I code, I write, I build. I've come into clients where it's like, hey, I want to like build my own application that does, X, Y, Z. And I'll like look at it and be like, or we could do it in Retool for like $15 a month. Okay, you need like 10 users. So, okay, $150 a month. The same thing if you had me do it, right? Like if you had me come and do it, like I'd charge you like $10,000 or $20,000. So why not just do that? Pay me a little bit of time and build that instead. So I still think it's there, right? Especially like if you're still new to the industry or you like building things in a certain way. I think people will always kind of try to push for that. I don't think it's like out of any sort of like malice or anything. It's just like, it's fun. Like, yeah, I like building things from scratch and doing things if I can. Right. But there is this kind of constant like weighing of the scales where it's like, okay, but where do we focus on business and the business value? And I think those conversations are happening a little more. Like I have some clients who are like, oh yeah, I use whatever insert product at the last company. Mm-hmm. I basically was able to, get a lot of the data into the data warehouse as like a marketing manager or marketing director. Mm-hmm. And now I'm in a new company and I just want to do the same thing. And I just want you to come in and like do the dashboard. Like I've had that conversation a lot recently with some clients where it's like, look, we know we can get that data in easily. That's not the problem. We now need you to like do the next step and add that layer. So that's kind of what I feel like I'm seeing. There's some people that will always want to build things from scratch. And then there's some people who are like, hey, I've already done this like 2 times. I know how to get the baseline. I need you just to do that extra layer. So,
yeah.
I'll say absolutely. Armon, I had a customer a few years back that was on BigQuery. And of course, if you're not familiar, BigQuery is charged by the, basically byte scanned, for lack of a better term. And they were having these large BigQuery bills, and they started writing all this code that was offloading things from BigQuery and running them in Python containers. And at the end of the day, the amount of spend on the resources to build that stuff and support it never figured into the equation. So, people are still the most expensive resource. They're the hardest to find. It's easy to go find some good compute. That's pretty easy. To go find a good SQL query engine, there's not a lot of obviously you do your due diligence on what platform's best for you, but all of them are good choices. Finding people, retaining people is very, very difficult. So I think it's short-sighted to be so obsessed with your snowflake spend or whatever spend. Obviously, do your best and don't waste money, but at the same time, your people spend is way more expensive. If you find a way to enable people to do more, you won't be so concerned with that snowflake spend. It'll be worth it. And it goes back to my point earlier as well, as reporting back the value to the organization. If you can quantify what that spend is getting you, then you wouldn't be so obsessed with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's funny. I feel like the scenario you're describing around, everybody building their own Python containers to offload some of the compute costs of the database. In, I think, historical times, the cost for the resources to do that would have been overlooked, whereas now it would have been a lot more scrutinized, is how it feels. Like it feels like that is becoming more of a focus for businesses when it comes to just data teams in general, which, yeah, again, it's like it's a bit of a higher level understanding of what's going on from your entire analytics architecture, but ultimately should be a good thing associated with like focusing on the right things, focusing on what's actually delivering value to the business versus trying to cost cut when in actuality you're raising the TCO. So, I see some comments, some questions. If anybody has any questions for these two fine gentlemen, let me know. Hit up the comments. I see Dan Scott saying what's up to all three of us. Hey, Dan, along with Kurt Lansing saying, glad to finally catch one of these conversations live. You came to the best one ever. And then we got Joel. So Joel's asking, be interested to hear any perspective on quick wins to build momentum and get the buy-in from the overall organization. I feel like this is something that, especially in the enterprise, we work with a lot of big companies. They often overlook how important it is to just get some quick wins with some low-hanging fruit before embarking on this 2-year-long, 3-year-long enterprise scale migration or net new data warehouse build. Like, we see this happen so often where instead of focusing on like, what are some quick wins we can deliver value to the business, get some more buy-in, kind of start this snowball effect. Instead they focus on like this big bang. And it always baffles me why that's such a common trend in data warehousing. Maybe it's just because of the times in the past where it was really hard to get quick wins. It's not really an excuse anymore, in my opinion. So, Ben, I'd be curious, what's your approach? How would you advise somebody like Joel or somebody else in some other organization when it comes to, you just got into a new role, trying to deliver some value quickly? Like, what's the best way to go about this?
Yeah, I was thinking like the first example that comes to mind was like an accidental quick win when I first started, like in working at a hospital. We had just kind of built out a data warehouse, and we were just like we just happenstance to be looking through the numbers. We were a finance team, so we were looking through kind of like the accounting, and we're like, hey, what's this 200K spend from this one department? And we ended up finding out that like this one department leader like somehow was able to spend like over $200,000 on basically computer equipment when they shouldn't have been able to, right? Like it's one of those things where, like as you kind of go up, like as check size get bigger, you need higher and higher people to sign off on them. And like somehow this person had like gone around that and like spent $200,000 and then like having to reassess like what that did to the budget. That was kind of an interesting quick win. Cool. But usually, like if we're talking about like an approach, I'm doing this with a client right now where it's like, okay, we're trying to figure out, okay, first, who's going to be our champion, right? I was actually reading a tweet thread about this where someone was talking about the CFO, and that's one possible champion. In this other case, it's more on the marketing, so like director of marketing, CMO. It's like, okay, this is our champion. We know that these people, right, like marketers, like love data, right? Like they want to have information on their ad spend, attribution, all these things. So if you can figure out, okay, what do they care? What information do they not have right now that they need to be making decisions? Okay, how do we get them that information? And so that's usually kind of my flow. It's like, okay, who's the champion? what information do they need that they're not getting? Like, what pains are they feeling? Like, they ask this question all the time. Like, am I spending money in the right place? Are my ads actually useful? Can we answer those questions? And then building something that can do that. That can be a dashboard. It could honestly just be a quick report that like is like, hey, here's a quick rundown. We could build this in an automated way in the future, but right now, here's a quick analysis. Yes, you are. No, you're not. Turn off these, ad campaigns. They're not making you any money. You're losing money.
Right.
I was talking to someone where they were like, that's sometimes the best solution is like not optimizing ad campaigns to make more money, but just turning off all the ones that are not making any money. Right. So I think that's kind of a great way, kind of put it together.
That makes sense. Basically, like one thing that I've seen is when you're thinking about an enterprise data warehouse where you're consolidating all this information from the lines of business, those are typically longer projects by nature. Whereas if you go into the line of business focus, like a marketing department or a finance department, there's usually going to be quicker, easier wins just because it's a little bit more straightforward by nature. And then going from there to actually the more centralized use cases of the business, trying to get that holistic view, which was going to take a bit longer. So Stewart, if you were to put your services hat back on from the earlier days at Red Pill, you did a ton of Oracle takeouts going to Snowflake, and worked on some massive migrations. Given these were pretty big projects, what was your approach to getting some of these quick wins along the way?
Yeah,
given that probably was EDW use cases.
I just want to echo what Ben said about marketing. It's a great one because the sources are all cloud SaaS applications, relatively new investments, haven't been running for 20 years like the ERP or 10 years like the ERP. So, and they've probably been, neglected in the past. So, and plus marketing people, based on their nature, will be your maven for success, and they will, tout the success they've gotten within the organization. But to talk about these migrations, it was always frustrating because based on on-prem, it made a lot of sense to consolidate. So because of licensing costs and just constrained compute and all those reasons. So I'd often talk to these CIOs or CTOs that all they could think about is that migration, that lift and shift, or that lift slightly refactor. We had to do all that. Right. And there were so many neglected use cases that hadn't been solved on-prem. And so, either or, you could start these quick wins while investigating the migration. These quick wins, they don't exist on-prem, but probably always should have. Do those quick wins while you're planning this migration, especially if you've made an ironclad decision on the technologies that you're going to do that migration on. They can go, it's not a binary choice. Start building new stuff. They would wait until all the old stuff's migrated, and then they'll start to consider some new builds and some new use cases. When you should be doing them probably in tandem. You should start building and solving the neglected workloads immediately, especially because they're quick win, as Joel said, and also they tend to be easier lift because they're going to be cloud-based solutions in a lot of cases.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like when you look at a large migration, the business will typically look at it almost like a sunk cost. They're like, okay, it's going to spend 2 or 3 years just to get everything offloaded into the cloud. It doesn't really move the needle. But if you're able to accomplish that in parallel as you're picking off these certain use cases in different lines of business, whether it's marketing or finance or some other department, and get those stakeholders interested, get them some value while you're going through this lift and shift, if that's what the business demands that they do. Although I typically would recommend you refactor some of that along the way. It's a good opportunity. Getting those quick wins in parallel, I think, would only help kind of alleviate some of the stress that comes with some of these larger scale migrations. So hopefully that answers the question, Joel. If anybody else has got some, definitely feel free to post in the comments here. I think one other thing that I'd be really curious to hear about from both your perspectives, I was reading some of Ben's blog posts recently. And I was talking about kind of some of the demands from data teams recently. Like we've obviously seen a larger focus on operational efficiency, being able to do more with less, or just do more with the existing team, right? Like, hey, we're not going to be able to grow the team. But I was on a webinar with Elation, Fivetran, and LightUp, data quality company, last week. And, I feel like, even talking to Satish, my co-founder, talking to Stewart, like data quality has always been something that plagued data teams. And so curious to hear some feedback on, like, first off, why is it such a big issue? And like, how does it actually get solved from both your perspectives?
Go for it, Ben.
Yeah. Data quality is like this I feel like it's a forever issue, at least for me, right? Like when I first started in the industry, I went to, I attended a lot of, I don't know if anyone's heard DAMA, like they're like data management group.
Yes.
I attend a lot of those meetings, and a lot of what they'd say is like garbage in, garbage out, right? Like, and we still say it today. And so like data quality has been like this constant thing that's always like, we know it's a problem. We know it's hard to manage. Most of the time, right? Like a lot of companies would like write like SQL checks and things like that, or something to try like can we try to get ahead of this? And it's always hard to get investment in the space. I think that's the other issue. There's a lot of tooling that exists nowadays where, like, again, all those SQL checks that exist, you could in theory, get pre-bought, or pre-built at the very least, and you don't have to build a whole system to do it. When I worked at the healthcare startup, we had a whole system that would do it, where we had SQL checks. It basically would then load it into the database, and like we could look back historically and see how different tables were kind of doing over time. So it's interesting to me that it's not too expensive to some degree to like use some of these solutions, but it is expensive enough that a lot of companies are like, maybe not. Like, do we want to spend, like I think a lot of them start around $20,000, before talking about like open source, talking about like pre-built, plug and play kind of solutions, starting in that range. So, for SMBs and mid-market companies, they're not really looking, I think, to jump in on those things. So usually in order to like get to a place where you need it, you need a problem where it's like the CEO or the CFO has now like made a complaint. To where it's like, okay, now we can maybe, try to do this. And I think it's just it tends not to be rewarded, which is the other issue is like, you have good data quality. It's almost expected, but it's hard to do because, again, you're dealing with like data sources that you don't always control. Or you're dealing with data sources that change. You're dealing with logic that changes, even at Facebook, sometimes like logic would be in the application that wouldn't exist later on. So you'd have to like add in like SQL case statements just to try to manage it. And so it's just all of these things where it's like not a lot of things go in the right direction to like motivate people to like constantly build high quality data.
I agree. And I'm going to sound like a broken record here in the fact that it's the fact that we don't measure outcomes. There's no proof that the data is good or bad. And there's a lot of people who simply don't want to, open the curtain and see whether or not you have bad data throughout your organization. I think the fact that that dashboards were the primary target for data for years, and people, proactively looking at dashboards and making decisions, and then we weren't measuring those decisions, so we don't know the outcomes of whether or not our poor quality data is costing us money or not. I think as we move more to data products, like if you have an ML model that uses data to do something, identify, predict, whatever, the product either works or it doesn't. Right. And if the data quality is bad, the product won't work. So I think as we move more to really data products that have a measurable outcome, we will see that the quality of our data is bad, and we can no longer ignore it. So, I do podcasts all the time, and anytime I'm asked for what's the prediction for this year, I've been saying for years, this is when this is the year data quality will finally be taken serious. And I've been wrong a lot. So I'm going to walk back from the ledge just a little. I'm not going to say that, but I think just the way that we're moving toward being measured, singing for our supper, having data products as opposed to just passive dashboards. I think we have to solve this. And I think that we'll finally start to take it seriously and SQL test
this year. This is the year. This is the year.
You're sounding like Michael Burry. Like guys falling.
Man, I mean, I agree as well with both of you. I mean, it feels like data quality at times is a bit of a taboo subject because, like, by the time you get to the dashboard and the business is making decisions on it, like, nobody really wants to know if it's inaccurate.
Yeah.
So,
like,
just to make that point, I've done migrations where during the migration we've identified lots and lots of calculation errors that have been running for years and years, and the answer was just keep it.
Oh,
We've been, it's going to be hard to explain why this number's all of a sudden dipped and all of that. So no, don't fix it. We've been living with it this long, and that was just maddening.
I do feel like there's a natural evolution in the analytics workflow. Like, we're super passionate about this when it comes to transformations and how we've seen automation impact each segment of the workflow. And I think for the longest time, the world was waiting for a platform like a Snowflake that gave users access and scalability, but was still simplistic and easy to use. Similarly, like, that led to other problem areas that were solved almost in the sequence of what was needed in the workflow of analytics. So, like, with Snowflake came something like Fivetran for automating the ingestion of data. And then following that, it's like, how do we accelerate transformations to get the data to the point that it's consumable? And hopefully, I think our expectation would be is that as we accelerate the development that's on the platforms, when it comes to transforming data and taking it from its raw format to the point that it's consumable, it'll open up doors for businesses to focus on things like data quality because they're actually able to accomplish the workflow so much more quickly. Yeah. Whereas in the past, it's like businesses and data teams are so far behind on the demands and requests that, like, the last thing they can do is go back and try to make sure that the quality is of just the highest level. And so you kind of go through these baby steps, it feels like at times. Like, the analytics market moves super quickly, but it also moves super slowly, it feels, as well.
Yeah, but if you apply that to any other industry, right? Like, we got to make more cars,
right?
No matter whether they blow up or what, I mean,
yeah.
I know that you weren't saying that this is what should happen, so I didn't want to necessarily. But I think it's just you got to sort of take a step back and kind of take a look at ourselves as data practitioners and say that quality is just as important in this industry as it is in any other industry, and it doesn't matter how much we produce if it's all kind of rubbish. So
yeah, makes sense. I also appreciate you bringing up DAMA, Ben. I haven't been to one of those events in a little while, like, definitely since the pandemic, but I remember going to those all the time, like the data architecture focus. And are they still doing quite a few of those around the US at this point?
They are. I think the thing with DAMA is, like, they need, it's like trying to, like, now catch kind of, I think, the new wave of people and keeping them interested. And I think that's, like, data governance, data management is all very important, but it's also, like, unavoidably dry, right? Like, it's hard to make interesting, right? Like, it's like, let's talk about data governance. It's like, okay, this isn't the sexiest subject. I want to talk about, like, like, if I'm an engineer, I want to be like, I want to talk about, like, compute and efficiency and things like that, or what's the cool new tool, or if you're on the data science side, it's like, I want to talk about ChatGPT. So I think in some cities they've had a hard time just kind of, like, keeping with that curve and like enticing new people to understand why it's important. But I like going to those events. Like, I'd say, like, if you're starting in the industry, you should go. Like, there's a lot of stuff you'll think you're discovering for the first time, and then you go to that event and you're like, oh no, this has
been going on forever.
There's a whole book on this. They've been doing this forever. Like, we're if you just come into the data industry, there's decades of experience that exist and is captured there. So
it's pretty hilarious. Like, there's so much in the kind of old school data approaches that has been neglected in a bit of the newer school, like startups, early stage companies that are doing data driven things. And we're seeing that evolve as well, especially in times like this where businesses are putting more of a demand on data teams to be efficient and sustainable with how they approach things. It's almost like the industry's relearning some of these historical concepts, but now with much more powerful technology in place to support it, along with a lot of innovation, which is always kind of cool.
Yeah.
So state of data engineering, I think given all these discussion points, I always think it's super interesting on how different industries are impacted, like what industries are being impacted the most and how so. Like you talked about in the behind the scenes earlier, working with PE firms and how they become some of your favorite clients. I'd love to hear from you around like what are you seeing firsthand, like which industries are benefiting, also which industries are hurting right now, and like which ones have the most potential as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have some insight, not all the insight here. Like, I can talk about the bias from what I'm working with, right? Like companies that are obviously having possibly a harder time is anything that's a little more discretionary, right? Like if it's like e-commerce businesses or things of that nature, where it's like a product where maybe you can wait a little longer till you buy a new shirt or something. Those tend to be a little more just held back. Whereas, if you're insurance, if you're, something that is hard, an inelastic good, so to speak, right? Like you're not going to pay for it.
Right.
Those tend to seem to be fine and are trying to figure out, kind of this new state. Yeah. Like PE firms are always interesting to me. Like they can be the most fun.
Mm-hmm.
Because like one, you might work for the actual PE firm, or you might work for some of their portfolio companies, which often, right, like PE firms are trying to do things like get like 30 companies and put them together. So deal with those data problems, right? Like, we have 30 different systems we now need to get all together so that we can answer questions on how we're doing financially, so we can reposition this product or this company. So I think they offer really interesting challenges, right? In terms of like how do we get all this stuff now from this crazy mess that we have, having 30 different HubSpot instances,
Right.
And trying to answer questions there. Because they're very like data hungry. Like they want to know like how these businesses that they've bought are doing.
Totally.
So it's very interesting from that regard. Yeah.
I mean, like any mergers and acquisitions scenario, any company that does that is always such an interesting data project or projects. So it's like, especially very acquisitive businesses like reinsurance, for example, maybe not even necessarily like PE firms specifically, but just highly acquisitive organizations that are trying to consolidate data. And they've got, like you said, maybe not just 30 HubSpot instances, but like 5 other SAP instances and 6 other major on-premise platforms that they need to now consolidate. It can get messy super quickly, get really difficult, along with all the other personalities associated with these companies. Stewart, what about you? What about you from your side? Like talking to different customers, talking to different organizations, different partners. What industries do you feel like are most interesting? Like anything interesting happening that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, this might echo the fact that I'm at Coalesce now, but deliver good ironclad solutions to businesses, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the consumer market has been highlighted is hit or miss, but if you're delivering super strong products and solutions to businesses, there's less churn in those services, and I would say that for interesting solutions is building data products for SaaS-based companies, right? Some of the fun I've had at Coalesce since I've been here is we're going through that process internally as well, where we bring a lot of data from the Coalesce platform and we put it in Snowflake, as you do, right? Of course. Yeah. And trying to measure things and trying to measure the success of our customers. And I think That's always fun, getting data out of a custom, or we'll say, proprietary application, and figuring out ways to measure its success.
Right.
There are theories, and you have to test the theories. You have to propose algorithms and decide whether or not they are, indicative of the customer experience. So that's been fun since I've been here, and it's always been fun. I had a lot of customers like that in the past, and that was always the most challenging, because in a lot of those cases, the customer didn't know how to measure these things. They didn't have the data, number one, but they hadn't really thought about measuring their customer success or journey.
Right.
And you get to bring a lot to the table and really prove your worth if you can deliver on that.
Totally. Yeah. It's interesting talking to so many different types of industries. I think, one thing that's unique about Coalesce being a early stage startup is we focused on like the most upmarket of upmarket use cases with like very sophisticated data warehouse experts. And so we were never initially focused on like some of the earlier stage tech companies, startups that, are working on being data driven, which I think are some of the businesses that are being impacted the most right now, just with how venture capital markets look. But it is having an effect on every industry, whether it's retail, like for example, like the gaming industry, like casinos. We've been working with a couple companies there, and you're seeing not necessarily that the projects are stopping, but just that they're just having to think more creatively about how they actually justify budget spend. And so it's like forcing us, along with I think every other vendor, to have to really define the value associated with the technology before a purchase can actually be approved by finance or the CEO or whoever it may be. Some industries I think are a little bit more resilient. Like we were talking about this earlier, and how like the insurance industry, it's not really an option. Like you're going to need to have car insurance or health insurance, right? So regardless of what happens, like that's something that people are going to continue to use, and those companies are less impacted than, say, your t-shirt e-commerce company that's selling swag for a YouTube channel, but ideally, hopefully what we see is that even those types of organizations can still accomplish what they need. They just are able to leverage different tech to do it and be a bit more productive than some of the other options out there. Put a focus on that versus like not doing anything at all. Because the whole basis of data projects is to be able to drive more value out of the use case. Otherwise, you probably shouldn't be doing anything in the first place. And so just figuring out strategies there is really key. So with all that, one of the other things I enjoyed reading on some of your blogs, Ben, is just around like the changes that are happening to data teams in general. And we'd just be curious to hear your feedback on like how are data teams changing? What shifts are you seeing with roles and personnel, and why?
Yeah. And, I think overall, I just kind of did a cursory look at different size, like not just sizes, more on like the type, like you brought up, the types of roles that you're seeing. And obviously I think one of the things I pointed out, I think the article you're referring to, is that like different companies and different size companies have like varying data teams and like varying roles inside that data team. Right.
Yeah.
And some of that has to do with budget. Some of that has to do with just, the size of company, that there's various reasons for that. But, you're kind of constantly seeing this like specialization, right? In terms of like, we kind of started in 2012 with data scientists. For a long time, those data scientists were forced to do kind of like ETL data engineering work. Then eventually they kind of got split. Okay, we have data engineers, we have data scientists now. And now we've kind of seen in some companies where it's like, okay, on top of that, now we have like a data platform engineer, right? Like someone who's literally like building and managing all the solutions. Maybe you have a data engineer, maybe you have an analytics engineering team or something similar on teams that are a little more parsed out. And so I think you're just seeing this constant specialization. And I think a lot of it's natural. Like when I say that, I don't think people are trying to add these layers. Before I had even heard the term analytics engineer, I was like, oh, there's kind of like two types of data engineers was often how I would think of it. It's like there's the ones that are more software focused and ones that are more, analytics focused. And that was how I describe it. So I think that was kind of like a natural split. Data platform engineers tend to be kind of more of just a team that, helps manage things, that is kind of DevOpsy, maybe not completely. So, and I do want to point out that like not everyone has this. Like if you're at a startup, you have probably a data engineer who's just like, I do all of it, right? Like I'm the person who's setting up all of this and trying to manage it and make it work. We'll see if that gets kind of consolidated, but for the most part, it just seems this interesting specialization continues to happen pretty naturally, regardless of if you think it should exist or not. It's like people just seem to kind of like float towards things. And I don't know if it's like similar to like, you see that with like other professions where, if you're a doctor, it was like, okay, first it was just all doctors. Now you have specializations that kind of parse out. So
yeah,
it's just kind of interesting.
I always want one thing that I've always felt is, especially in like the Fortune 2000, other, mid-market companies, there's always been this, what I viewed as a very neglected role when it comes to the vendor space, especially in the modern data stack, around data architects. And like every big company has a team that's responsible for data architecture and data architects or enterprise data architects. And it's something that I hardly ever see in the startup space or early stage companies. Do you feel like that has just been replaced by like a data platform engineer? Like, is that the new data architect? Or do you think that there's going to be a resurgence in that concept as companies realize the importance of data architecture once they fall on their face a couple times? Like, what are both of your thoughts on that? Because it just seems like such an important role that isn't really answered by a data engineer.
Yeah. I think like as much as it's not necessarily answered by the data engineer, I think that's who ends up doing it, right? Like generally it's like, oh, I just do all of it, right? At Facebook, that was kind of the way. I think it's somewhat encouraged probably by the data mesh architecture as well, where it's like, do you need a data architect or do you just have teams that kind of do their own thing, right? Yep. So obviously I think it's good to probably have someone that can add some sort of like centralized theme. I think that's the biggest thing that like a lot of teams can sometimes miss, is like having some sort of centralized theme, even if it's just for the whole company, of like, this is how we do data. And that
define
way
patterns, right? Yeah. Define patterns and how they're going to be done, and then turn those patterns over to the different teams, right?
Yeah. Maybe that becomes the head of data engineering's role. I mean, maybe that becomes the VP of analytics role, is to define the architecture for the data engineering team. Because I could see how it'd be difficult as a data engineer that's already being spread thin to do everything, to also take 2 steps back and look at the overall architecture and be like, yep, we're heading in the right direction. Like this is going to be, and not to mention like who gets the seniority to determine that if you've got differing of opinions. And so maybe it's just that gets rolled up to the next level above of the head of data engineering, and that becomes part of the skill set.
I'd say in the sort of the retooling that I did for years, taking people up from off-prem, replatforming them in the cloud, and I'd often, I would do this that I've done this talk for a lot of customers about, well, what does the ideal data team look like? And if you look at like on-prem, with the concept of a primary report and a secondary report, right? Who's your what's your primary? And this is not a person. This is sort of an endeavor, right? So on-prem, or at least Fortune 500, 200, whatever, typically you've got the primary report being to technology. I'm a Unix admin, I'm a DBA, I'm whatever. And then the secondary report was to one or more projects that you're working on. I think what I would always recommend is shift that as you replatform, and it's meshy. We didn't have data mesh really concept at that time, but it really is the concept of having your primary report be the domain under which you're building data products for. And I think the enterprise struggles with that approach, because the data team would be the only team, and that's shifting in that direction. But I think it actually, as you move everything to the cloud, or at least most of the stuff that's movable, it really should be sort of the approach you take, is that your primary obligation should be to the thing you're building. Secondary should be to the technology you use. And I think that we need to get more enterprises to sort of rethink IT departments along those lines.
I think they're being forced to, because lines of business are being given access to technology that wasn't possible in the past. Like, IT used to be the gatekeeper. The centralized IT team used to be the gatekeeper of data. Then lines of business now are able to go and get access to data and do whatever they want with it. And so how do we actually mesh these two together so that they can work in a complementary fashion is starting to just be forced, I would say, because these lines of business are now capable, and you're starting to see like citizen data engineers within the lines of business start to just do their own ad hoc version of analytics for that department specifically. And so how you get the centralized team to actually work with that person or with that team in the line of business in a way that's complementary, because they've got a more holistic view of all the lines of business combined in one centralized repository, I think is just going to happen naturally. It's starting to happen naturally. I think the first step was lines of business being able to do this in the first place.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting. I mean, I think that's one of the coolest things about the whole concept of data mesh. I think there's still a little bit of room for growth there and maturity before companies will really be able to implement it successfully. It's definitely some of the things, it's one of the concepts I'm most excited about, accommodating from the Coalesce side, but it does feel like we're still getting there, right? It's like, does still feel like it's more conceptual than fully executed. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but like that's just been my overall sentiment. It's like we're marching towards it naturally, and we'll get there at some point soon, but it's still difficult in practice, especially in a large business.
I really agree with Ben's point about having the one thing that central IT, or whatever you want to call it, infrastructure, can do is make it define patterns, build out toolkits, widgets, templates, whatever you want to call it, right? And deliver those to these domains so that they don't have to struggle with those pieces. And also, consistency across domains is really important. We don't necessarily want every, data mesh domain defining technology. As a matter of fact, you don't want them doing that at all. You want them using the tools that have been agreed upon, the governance standards that have been agreed upon. You just want them to go and build the data product themselves, not define everything. And I think that that's definitely something that's missing in a lot of the organizations that I've consulted for over the years.
It's like the centralized team, whatever we want to call it, the centralized data team has to make this shift of historically being maybe a gatekeeper to like somebody or a team that now empowers these other lines of business. And
Armon, it's instead of the team that always says no, we need to be the team that always says yes, and have a culture that enables that, right? But I mean, I can't tell you how many times it's like, you can't have access to that data,
right?
Or no, we're not gonna build analytic solutions for this department or whatever. Now you just need to be the team that enables instead of disables.
It's like you have to accept that you now do have access to that data just because of the nature of the situation. And so we need to figure out how we can work with that instead of how we used to work historically. So bit of a paradigm shift, but exciting one. Super fun one. Cool. We got like a few more minutes left. Anybody's got any last questions? I see we got some people chiming in here from Utah, UK, a little bit of a side conversation happening here around data quality, because it is the year for data quality after all.
Finally.
This is the year. I think as we wrap it up, I'd be curious, if there's anything anything else, Ben, on your side that you're seeing that we haven't touched on? Like you brought up ChatGPT earlier. I was up late last night talking to Satish about how it's going to impact everything. Kind of a little scary, to be honest, but it's I don't know if that's kept either of you up at night, or if you put much thought into that, or anything else that's cool that's been on your radar.
I need to start poking around more with ChatGPT, only in sense that I've seen, like, as someone that does do content, I'm like, oh, there's so many angles here. I've already seen
No,
kind
it's endless.
No, I just mean, like, I think there's a few people who have put together videos where it's like, oh, I did like a data engineering project with ChatGPT, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Like, yeah. How would that kind of function? I think what would be really interesting, is like a co-pilot for companies, like a GitHub co-pilot for companies, where it's like, Snowflake has all your prior queries that your companies run. Totally. Or in a lot of other solutions do as well. Like, why not just run that over all of that and like specifically tailor this model for your company and like create a solution that does that, so that like it can auto complete your query, or it's like, oh yeah, like I've already seen this query like a gajillion times, because that happens all the time, where it's like you're just rewriting the same query someone else did. Right. Even if it's just on an ad hoc basis, or like sometimes you even lose your query. Like where did I put that query? I know I need to do this thing. I didn't save it. So I think that would be interesting for me, just to like see if that could be something that could like, improve efficiency. Because I think it's one of the things too. It's like every company has slightly different data models. So the way for it to be helpful would be, being very tailored towards yours. So I think that's something I'd be interested about. But yeah, there's a few angles I think I'd like to play with ChatGPT overall, especially again just in the content space.
Yeah. It looks like somebody's just commenting right now about using ChatGPT for creating DDL for tables, and it's about 80% accurate, which I agree with. We went through a bit of an exercise on using it to write joins, for example, and it was like, yeah, about 80% accurate. Like, it's not perfect. You're still going to need to refine it and look through it with the fine comb, but it is impressive. I mean, it's pretty cool to see it do other things, like write you a poem about how much Stewart loves Ben or something like that. This is what keeps me up at night. What about you, Stewart? Any other last thoughts before we wrap this up?
I am a Ben fanboy. It's true. No, I mean, I'm really excited about the data catalog space. I was one track minded. I'm really interested in seeing where data catalogs go. How much they get adopted, because a lot of customers I've seen don't have them, right? And they seem like the lowest hanging fruit of installing it. They start crawling everything you have, and then they provide information. And I'm interested to see how much we have at our fingertips a few years from now, as far as what data people are using. AI is probably gonna play a big part in this, or ML is going to play a big part in what those catalogs produce. There's always this sort of curtain about, I can query my data, but I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
And as we start to sort of pull that out of the shadows and into the light, and people know what the data means, as opposed to just a table name and a column name.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, look, I'm pumped to have you both here. It looks like everybody's saying how much they appreciate it. Great session to both Ben and Stewart. I always enjoy having these conversations. We're going to have some awesome guests in the next one next month with Colin Graves from North Labs, along with Chris Tabb from Leading Edge IT. I'm sure you've met with Chris recently, Ben, at some event.
I missed him, sadly, because of the when you were here, the snow.
Yeah,
that's right.
He was in town that same week. You guys didn't get the chance to meet up?
We were supposed to do a happy hour the next day, and it was just like, everyone was like, probably not making it. And I was like, gonna cancel. Sorry, Chris. Sorry. And I think Matt had also flown out. I was like, sorry, Matt. Sorry, Chris. Luckily, Matt, like, you might have seen him that day.
Yeah. I ran into him that same night at the restaurant.
Came to the dinner that was being thrown that night. So
yep.
It all worked out. It was, at least with him, not with Chris. Sorry.
Crazy. I was driving back from Breckenridge towards Denver, and Chris was like, hey, I'm in it was like Idaho Springs or something. And it was, I can't remember what the town's called, between Breckenridge and Denver. And I ended up pulling off, and we got the chance to catch up, meet in person, grab some beers. So I'm excited to have him on as a guest. I'm sure we'll have some great conversations. But with that being said, it was a great session. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much, Stewart. These are always so fun. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.
Yep. Thank you.
Cool.